You are listening to HOA Neighbor Wars. I wish this was exaggerated. My name is Dan. I work as an airline baggage supervisor at the regional hub outside Bend, Oregon, which means I have seen every kind of chaos human beings can create when they are stressed and tired and convinced they are right. I moved to Harborview 3 years ago because the neighborhood looked quiet, the HOA fees were reasonable, and the covenant packet I skimmed seemed normal. I was wrong on all 3 counts. The Harborview HOA Incorporated turned out to be the kind of place where one missing guest pass turns into a neighborhood scandal, and the gate access administrator Ann Anderson treated every parking space like a battle she was born to win. I am standing in the guest lot right now, rain misting my face, and Ann is screaming at me because my permit decal is crooked. Not missing. Not expired. Crooked. She is jabbing her clipboard with colored tabs at my windshield like it is a murder weapon, and I can see her mouth forming the words tampering and violation and immediate tow authorization. I take a breath and keep my voice level. This is not my first rodeo with unreasonable people, but this one is going to be different, because I am trying to refinance my place, and any lien threat could wreck the deal. The bank already sent the appraisal schedule, and if Ann puts a lien on my unit before that clears, my rate locks and my closing costs both go up. So I need this to end fast, but Ann has other plans. She says the decal fell crooked when I shut the door this morning, so it must be tampered with. I tell her it is the same decal the HOA office printed 2 weeks ago, same serial number, same hologram strip, and I did not touch it. She does not care. She taps her handheld radio against the clipboard and says she is calling compliance, which in Harborview means the tow vendor the board keeps on speed dial. I ask her to show me the rule that says a crooked decal equals tampering. She smiles, flips one of the colored tabs on her clipboard and says, "You think this is petty? I think this is my purpose." That line hits me like a slap, because I realize she actually believes it. She is not enforcing rules to keep the neighborhood safe. She is enforcing rules because enforcing rules is the only power she has, and she is going to use every ounce of it. I pull out my phone and start recording. She notices, and her smile gets wider. "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." I do not know what that means yet, but I will find out soon enough. Ann calls someone on the radio, and within 10 minutes a white panel van with amber strobes pulls into the lot. The driver gets out wearing a high-vis vest and gloves, and he walks straight to my car without saying a word to me. Ann hands him a slip of paper, he nods, and then he kneels beside my front driver tire and starts unfolding a metal boot clamp from a canvas bag. I step forward and say, "Hold on, I live here. This is my assigned guest spot for my own visitors, and my decal is valid." The driver does not even look up. He says, "Ma'am gave me authorization. Take it up with her." I turn to Ann and she is already writing on another form, this one pink. She says the fee for the boot is $75, payable immediately, and if I do not pay within 4 hours the car gets towed, and I owe storage on top. I ask her where in the covenant it says she can boot a resident for a crooked sticker. She taps the pink slip and says, Section 14.3, Compliance Verification Authority. I have read Section 14.3. It does not say that. It says the board can authorize removal of abandoned vehicles after 30 days' notice. But Ann is the gate access administrator, which means she controls who gets codes, who gets guest passes, and apparently who gets booted. I let her think she won this round, because I am already planning the next move. I pay the $75 in cash because I need my car for work tomorrow, and the vendor unlocks the boot and drives away. Ann hands me a receipt with no HOA letterhead, just a handwritten note that says boot removal fee and her initials. I take a picture of it. She notices and says, "You are going to need a lot more than pictures if you want to fight this." I smile and say nothing, because she is right and she is also wrong. I do need more than pictures, and I am going to get them. That night I sit down with the covenant binder the HOA gave me at closing, and I read every word of Section 14. Subsection 3 does not mention boots. It does not mention decals. It does not mention immediate tow authorization for cosmetic issues. What it does mention is a requirement that any fine or enforcement action over $25 must include written notice with a 7-day appeal window. Anne skipped that part. I make a note and keep reading. Section 18 covers guest parking, and it says residents in good standing may use guest spaces when hosting visitors, provided they display a valid permit. My permit is valid. The only question is whether crooked equals invalid, and the covenant does not define that. So I decide to test it. The next morning I print out Section 14 and Section 18, highlight the relevant lines, and walk over to the HOA management office in the clubhouse. The woman at the desk, a cheerful contractor named Brenda, takes my packet and says she will forward it to the board. I ask if I can get a receipt for the boot fee refund. She frowns and says she does not have a record of any boot fee. I show her the handwritten receipt. She says that is not an official HOA charge, and if I paid a vendor directly, I need to take it up with the vendor. I ask for the vendor name and phone number. She says she cannot give that out without board approval. I am starting to see how this game works. 2 days later, I get an email from the board. It is not about the boot fee. It is about a new violation. The subject line says guest parking compliance audit, and the body says my vehicle was observed in guest parking on 3 separate dates without a valid guest present, and I owe a cumulative fine of $225. I read it twice to make sure I am not missing something. I was not hosting guests on those dates. I was parking in the guest lot because my assigned carport was blocked by a landscaping truck the HOA hired, and I have photos of that too. I reply with the photos attached and ask for the fine to be reversed. The response comes back in 4 hours. Signed by Anne. It says the landscaping blockage does not constitute an exemption under Section 18.2, and the fines stand. It also says I need to submit a special use parking permit application for any future use of guest spaces, even when my carport is blocked. I look up the application. It does not exist. I search the HOA website. I search the covenant binder. I search my closing packet. There is no such thing as a special use parking permit in the Harborview rules. I call Brenda and ask her about it. She puts me on hold for 6 minutes, then comes back and says the board recently updated the parking policy and the new application will be available next week. I ask when the update was approved. She says she does not have that information. I thank her and hang up, and then I file a records request under Oregon Public Records Law asking for the meeting minutes where the parking policy was updated. If the board wants to play document games, I can play document games. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next neighborhood disaster. 3 days later, I get a thin envelope in my mailbox with the HOA return address. Inside is a single page that says the records request is denied because Harborview HOA Incorporated is a private non-profit corporation and not subject to Oregon Public Records Law. I check with a lawyer friend who does real estate work, and he confirms they are technically right. HOAs are not government entities. But he also says that if the board is charging fines under rules that do not exist, that is a breach of the covenant, and I can file a complaint with the management company or take it to small claims. I thank him and decide to try the management company first, because small claims takes months and I do not have months. My refinance appraisal is in 2 weeks. I need this resolved now. I call the management company regional office and ask to speak to someone above Brenda. I get transferred 3 times and finally reach a man named Greg who says he is the regional supervisor. I explain the situation, the crooked decal, the boot fee, the invented permit requirement, the fines for parking when my carport was blocked. Greg listens and takes notes, and then he says he will look into it and get back to me within 5 business days. I ask if he can put a hold on the fines while he investigates. He says he cannot do that without board approval. I say the board is the one issuing the fines. He says he understands my frustration, but his hands are tied unless I can provide documentation that the board violated the covenant. I tell him I already sent documentation to Brenda. He says he will review it. I thank him and hang up, and I know nothing is going to happen in 5 business days. The next morning I wake up to a knock on my door at 7. I open it and find a man in a polo shirt with a vendor logo holding a tablet. He says he is here to verify parking compliance and he needs to see my carport and my vehicle registration. I ask who sent him. He says the HOA hired his company to audit all resident parking and confirm that every vehicle has the correct permits. I ask if he has a work order. He shows me the tablet screen which has my address and a checklist, but no signature and no date. I tell him I am not letting him into my carport without a signed authorization from the board. He shrugs and says he will mark me as non-compliant and the board will follow up. He leaves, and I immediately email Greg at the management company with a photo of the vendor and the tablet screen. I say this feels like harassment and I want it on record. Greg replies 2 hours later and says the board has the authority to hire compliance vendors under Section 19.4. I look up Section 19.4. It covers emergency repairs, not parking audits. I reply and point that out. Greg does not respond. That afternoon, I get another email from the board. This one says I am being sent to collections for the unpaid boot fee and the guest parking fines, total $400. And if I do not pay within 10 days, a lien will be filed against my unit. I feel my chest tighten because this is exactly what I was afraid of. A lien shows up on title reports. The bank will see it. My refinance will stall or fall through, and I will be stuck with my current rate, which is 2 points higher than what I locked. I cannot let that happen. I pay the $400 online through the HOA portal, and I immediately file a dispute through the same portal, saying the charges are invalid and I am paying under protest. The portal confirms my payment and says my dispute will be reviewed at the next board meeting, which is 3 weeks away. 3 weeks is after my appraisal. I need a different plan. I call my lawyer friend again and explain the escalation. He says paying under protest is smart, and he suggests I document everything and consider filing a demand letter to force the board to provide the rules they claim exist. He offers to draft the letter for $300. I agree. 2 days later, I have a 1-page letter on law firm letterhead that requests copies of the updated parking policy, the meeting minutes approving it, the vendor contract for the compliance audits, and the authority under which Anne issued the boot charge. It gives the board 10 days to respond or face a lawsuit for breach of covenant and unfair business practices. I send it certified mail to the board president and copy Greg at the management company. The same day I send the letter, I get a text from my neighbor Tim, who lives 2 units down. Tim is a quiet guy who works in tech and flies drones as a hobby. He says he saw the vendor at my door, and he also saw Anne talking to the vendor in the parking lot before he came to my unit. He recorded it with his drone because he was testing a new camera mount, and he asks if I want the footage. I say yes. He sends me a 2-minute clip that shows Anne pointing at my building, handing the vendor a paper, and laughing. The audio is faint, but I can make out her saying, "Just get him on record refusing. That is all I need." I save the file and send a copy to my lawyer friend. He says it is gold. 5 days after I send the demand letter, I get a call from a woman who identifies herself as the HOA attorney. She says the board received my letter and they are prepared to offer a settlement. I ask what the settlement includes. She says the board will refund the $400 and withdraw the lien threat if I agree to drop any further complaints and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I ask about the parking policy and the vendor audit. She says those are board prerogatives and not part of the settlement. I say no deal. She pauses and then says the board is willing to add a parking policy clarification to the next newsletter if I sign today. I say I want the refund, a written apology, a no-contact directive so Ann stops targeting me, and a board resolution that prohibits retaliatory enforcement. She says that is not realistic. I say then we will see each other in court, and I hang up. My hands are shaking because I just turned down $400 I need, but I know if I take that deal, Ann will find another angle, and I will be right back here in 3 months. The next day I get an email from Greg saying the management company is temporarily suspending all parking enforcement actions pending a policy review. It does not say why, but I know it is because my lawyer letter scared someone. I also get a second email from Ann, sent directly to my personal address, which I never gave her. The subject line is "Final Courtesy Notice," and the body says, "I have been observed violating the guest parking policy on 4 additional dates, and I owe another $300. She attaches a spreadsheet with dates, times, and photos of my car in the guest lot. I open the photos and immediately see the problem. 3 of the 4 photos show my car parked legally in my assigned carport, not the guest lot. The timestamps are wrong. One photo is from a day I was out of town for work and my car was not even in the state. I forward the email to Greg and my lawyer with a note that says this is harassment and fraud. My lawyer replies within an hour and says we need to escalate. He drafts a second letter, this time addressed to the management company corporate office and the HOA board, alleging targeted harassment, falsified evidence, and violations of Oregon landlord-tenant law. He sends it the same day. That night, I go to the monthly HOA board meeting, which is held in the clubhouse community room. There are about 15 residents in the audience, plus the 5 board members at a folding table up front. Ann is sitting in the front row with her clipboard and her handheld radio on her lap. I sit in the back and wait for the open comment period. When it comes, I stand up and walk to the microphone. I say my name and my address, and then I say I am here to ask the board to explain the parking policy they have been enforcing against me, because I cannot find it in the covenant, and the management company cannot provide documentation that it was ever approved. The board president, a man in his 60s with reading glasses, looks at Ann. Ann stands up and says the policy is an administrative guideline under her authority as gate access administrator, and it does not require board approval. I ask where that authority is written. She flips a tab on her clipboard and reads Section 12.7, which says the board may delegate ministerial functions to committees or officers. I say gate access is not the same as parking enforcement, and I ask the board to vote on whether Ann has that authority. The president says it is not on the agenda, and they cannot vote on it tonight. I say fine, then I am formally requesting it be added to next month's agenda, and I am also requesting the board review the vendor compliance audits and the falsified parking photos Ann sent me yesterday. The room goes quiet. One of the other board members, a woman in her 50s, asks what I mean by falsified. I pull out my phone and show the email on the projector screen. The photos are blown up for everyone to see, and it is obvious that the car is in the carport, not the guest lot. Anne stands up and says the spreadsheet had a data entry error and she will correct it. I say the error is not data entry, the error is that she is making up violations to justify fines. The president bangs his gavel and says this is not the time for personal attacks. I say it is not personal, it is factual, and if the board does not address it, I will file a lawsuit. Another board member, a younger man, says they will take my comments under advisement. The meeting moves on. After the meeting, Tim comes up to me and says 2 other residents approached him asking for copies of the drone footage because they have also been hit with bogus fines. He says he is going to post the footage in the neighborhood Facebook group unless the board resolves this. I tell him to hold off for now, because I do not want to give Anne an excuse to claim we are coordinating a harassment campaign against her. He agrees. That night I get a private message from another neighbor, a retired paralegal named Sandra, who says she used to serve on the board and she quit because Anne was impossible to work with. She says Anne has been using her gate access role to build a database of every resident's comings and goings, and she has been sharing that data with the board president to justify enforcement actions. Sandra says she has emails that prove it, and she is willing to share them if I need them. I thank her and save her contact info. The pieces are starting to come together. The following week I get a notice in the mail that my dispute was reviewed at an emergency board session and denied. The notice says the original fines are reinstated, I owe another $400, and if I do not pay within 5 days, the board will proceed with collections and lien filing. I call Greg immediately and ask why the management company is allowing this when they said enforcement was suspended. He says the suspension applied only to new actions, not existing disputes. I ask how an emergency session can overrule a formal dispute without giving me a chance to present evidence. He says the board has discretion to manage disputes as they see fit. I say that is not what the covenant says. He says he is sorry but his hands are tied. I hang up and call my lawyer. He says we are past the point of letters. He is going to file a motion for a temporary restraining order to block the lien and force the board to produce the meeting minutes and the vendor contracts. He says it will cost me $1,500 up front and there is no guarantee we win. I agree, because at this point I am not fighting over $400. I am fighting to keep my refinance alive and to make sure Anne does not do this to someone else. 2 days before my refinance appraisal, I get an email from the management company corporate office. It is not from Greg. It is from his boss, the regional director, a woman named Laura. She says the corporate office has completed an internal review of my complaint, and they have found multiple procedural irregularities in the enforcement actions taken by the Harborview Board. She says the company is requiring the board to refund all disputed fines, halt all pending collections actions, and revise the parking policy to comply with the recorded covenant. She also says Anne has been removed from her role as gate access administrator, pending further review. The email ends with an apology and a request that I contact her directly if I have any further issues. I read it 3 times to make sure it is real. Then I forward it to my lawyer and ask him to hold the restraining order motion, but keep it ready in case the board tries to reverse course. He agrees. The appraisal happens on schedule. The appraiser finds no liens, no disputes, no clouds on title. My refinance closes 2 weeks later, and I lock in a rate that saves me $300 a month. I feel like I can breathe again. But I am not done, because Anne is still a resident and she still has access to the neighborhood Facebook group, and 2 days after the corporate email goes out, she posts a long rant claiming I fabricated evidence, weaponized the legal system, and destroyed her reputation. She says the board caved to a bully and the neighborhood is no longer safe. The post gets 20 comments in the first hour, half supporting her and half calling her out. Tim posts the drone footage. Another resident posts a screenshot of a fine notice Ann sent them for parking in their own driveway. The group admin, who is not affiliated with the board, takes down Ann's post and replaces it with a pinned correction that includes a link to the management company email and a note that says, "Misinformation and personal attacks are not allowed." Ann replies in the comments claiming censorship. The admin bans her from the group. That is when I know I won. 3 weeks later, I get a settlement offer in the mail. It is signed by the board president and countersigned by Laura from the management company. The settlement includes a full refund of all fines and fees I paid, including the $75 boot charge, totaling $475. It includes a written no-contact directive prohibiting Ann or any board member from initiating enforcement actions against me without documented covenant violations and written notice with appeal rights. It includes a board resolution banning retaliatory enforcement, with penalties for violations including removal from the board and personal liability for damages. And it includes an agreement that the board will not pursue any further claims related to parking, guest passes, or decals unless I actually violate a rule that is written in the recorded covenant. In exchange, I agree to drop any potential legal claims and sign a mutual release. My lawyer reviews it and says it is a clean win. I sign it. The refund check arrives a week later along with a revised parking policy that removes all references to special use permits, compliance audits, and administrative guidelines. The new policy is 2 pages long and it tracks the covenant language exactly. I make 3 copies and keep one in my car, one in my unit, and one in a folder labeled HOA in case I ever need it again. Tim tells me the board held a special meeting and voted to terminate the vendor contract for compliance audits after the corporate office flagged it as unauthorized. Sandra tells me Ann tried to run for a board seat in the next election and lost by a landslide after her Facebook ban, and the settlement became public knowledge. I do not gloat, but I do not pretend I am not satisfied. 6 months later, I am sitting in my carport, engine idling, about to leave for the airport. My permit decal is stuck perfectly straight on the windshield, same as it has been since the settlement. I glance over at the guest lot and see a new resident moving in, and I think about walking over and giving them a copy of the revised parking policy just in case. But I do not, because the HOA is quiet now, and I want to keep it that way. I let her get the last word, because I wanted the last consequence. And I got it. The board votes to require actual evidence before fines. Ann's group post gets removed and replaced with a correction. And the settlement includes full refunds and a no-contact order that has teeth. The funny part is, the thing that finally broke her was the same rule she loved to quote, the covenant section about ministerial authority. Turns out when you actually read it, ministerial means clerical, not enforcement. Karen insisted it was a fire lane issue when my decal was crooked, but the actual curb markings in the city ordinance prove she was wrong. The fire lane is 50 feet away and marked with red paint and signs. My guest spot was never in it. She made it up, and when the management company finally looked at the site photos, they saw it too. That is what triggered the corporate review. That is what cost her the gate access role. And that is what made sure she could never do this to anyone else. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.